Evening, everybody. We're going to begin our meeting. So my name is Damaris Reyes, and I am the interim chair of the Land Use Zoning and Public-Private Housing Committee. I mean, that's what we kind of still call it. John is our vice chair, and we're going to have a presentation tonight from the Department of City Planning regarding the City of Yes. We've all talked about it. There'll be some announcements that'll be made. After the presentation, we're gonna allow the committee members to ask questions. Then we will allow our consultant to chime in and ask some questions. Then we will open the floor to the public. So if you are here and you want to speak, please sign up to speak. And if you are online and you want to speak, what's the process there? We have to.
Raise their Zoom hand when we tell them it's open.
Okay, so if you are online, once we are open to the public, we will let you know so that you can raise your hand via Zoom. And then we can put you on stack and let you ask your questions as well. So the first order of business is the approval of the minutes. And has everybody had a chance? Any objections to the minutes? Any corrections, additions? Okay.
Motion to approve. Second.
Okay. All in favor? We don't really need to do that, but
Assumed approved.
right, assumed approved, okay. And then do we do roll call attendance now? So
Damaris Reyes,
I'm here.
John Fout, present. Ariadna. Alistair.
Yes.
Is absent, right? Herman. What's over there? Trevor.
Herman's present. I was here.
I knew Herman was over there. I had him marked already. Laura Lugo. Jaylene Rodriguez.
Yes.
Sandra. Trevor.
She's out.
Oh, right. Steve Herrick.
Here.
Megan Joy. No. And Anisha.
Here.
Perfect.
All right. All right, so I guess we have DCP on. Hi, I can't see, I can see here. Okay. Welcome, thank you for coming to the Community Board, to Community Board 3, to talk to us about this new initiative, the zoning text amendment. We're going to allow you all to begin the presentation. Do you need control? Are you showing slides?
Yeah, we would love some control. We will be showing slides today.
All right, so we're gonna make you a co-host so that you can share your presentation.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay. All right, and just, I don't know if you heard us, but after your presentation, the committee members will ask questions first, and then we will ask our consultant, George, to chime in, and then we will open the floor to the public, okay?
Perfect. Can everyone see this presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, first of all, thank you all so much for having us back, taking the time to hear about this proposal and discussing next steps. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Francesca Bruce. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a borough planner with the Department of City Planning. And tonight I am joined by my colleague, Chris Lee, who's a senior planner in zoning, as well as Jose Tricios, a Manhattan team leader. So today I'll be taking around 30 minutes, more or less, to tell you about the upcoming zoning text amendment with ample time for questions at the end. So yes, thank you for please holding your questions. Okay. So the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity is the second of 3 citywide initiatives to modernize and update our city's zoning regulations, part of Mayor Adams' plan for a more equitable City of Yes. The other 2 citywide reforms to our zoning resolution are the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, which is currently in public review, and City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, which is an inclusive citywide approach to our housing crisis that aims to expand and diversify the housing supply and to ensure that every neighborhood does its part to help meet the housing needs and provide equitable access to housing for all New Yorkers. That proposal is expected to start public review next spring in 2024. So before we dive into the policy itself, let's take a moment to review what zoning actually governs when it comes to businesses in New York City. Zoning defines hundreds of uses or business types, sorts them by district, and regulates things like what kind of business activities you can do in your space and how big you can be. And because in many cases, the way that zoning regulates businesses hasn't been updated in more than 60 years, there are some outdated and sometimes counterproductive regulations on business activity, like setting a strict square footage cap on how much space a bakery can devote to actual baking. So knowing that our business-oriented zoning was in need of a refresh, the department has been asking small business owners, chambers of commerce, business improvement districts, industrial service providers, and other stakeholders across the city ways that zoning might be getting in the way of establishing or expanding businesses. And our research and engagement teams have met with over 100 groups, had 5 public information sessions, and have heard from countless New Yorkers about their challenges. So this proposal has really been shaped by community concerns. And I imagine some of you would like to learn more about who we spoke with to develop these proposals. You can explore that on the portal for the Economic Opportunity Proposal. And maybe Chris, if you'd be so kind as to maybe drop the link in the chat, that would be great. So naturally, a lot of what we've heard is that it can be a challenging field to run a business here in New York City, and dealing with government regulation is always, well, it can often be frustrating, slow, and confusing, and sometimes even illogical. And so often all of this red tape makes investing in business hard. And that contributes in turn to our city being less vibrant, costing existing businesses time and money, with fewer people able to start a business, and then more vacant storefronts, more businesses leaving their neighborhood or even the city overall to expand. So our overarching vision for this initiative is to make sure that our zoning works for our economy and not against it. And as a result of this work, to have a zoning resolution that is simpler, more adaptable, and more modern. So some of these proposals may already be familiar to you. So tonight I'll try and focus on how these might apply to Community Board 3 specifically. As of this year, using figures from the New York State Department of Labor, Community Board 3 has 5,500 jobs spread across a range of sectors of the economy. And using information from LiveXYZ, a data services company that provides information to the city, the district has also approximately 4,730 storefronts, with a range of business types occupying those spaces. And about 800 of these storefronts are vacant. And that's a rate that's 1% higher than Manhattan and 5% higher than the city overall. And I know this has been a significant source of concern for CB3 in recent years, especially. Many of these zoning changes would make it easier to fill these storefront spaces by giving a wide variety of businesses more certainty on where they can locate and what they can do with that space. So how do we achieve this? This here is a comprehensive list of all the proposals, in case somebody wants to screenshot it, organized into 4 overarching goals. The first of these is that we want to make it easier for businesses to find space and grow. And the main way we propose to do this is by lifting zoning barriers so some businesses can be closer to their customers, and I'll discuss these first 6 proposals momentarily. Second, we want to support growing industries by reducing obstacles for emerging business types, which can help these businesses thrive across the city and create jobs. Third, we want to foster vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring that businesses contribute to active, safe, and walkable streets. Fourth, and finally, we want to create new opportunities for businesses to open in the future by creating new kinds of zoning tools that can boost job growth and business expansion in all 5 boroughs. So I'll now go through each of the 18 proposals listed here, designed to change our zoning in order to meet those goals. So as I mentioned, our first goal is to make it easier for businesses to find space and grow by lifting zoning barriers so that businesses can locate near their customers. Our first 6 proposals would further that by, first, reactivating storefronts, simplifying district use types, enabling more small-scale production, removing unnecessary loading dock requirements, allowing commercial activity on upper floors, and modernizing use terms. So let's break that down. Today, storefronts that are deemed non-conforming, for example, this shop in a historic residential district on the right, face a 2-year time clock for reactivation, or else they have to remain vacant, and this contributes directly to vacancy in the city. Proposal 1 would remove that time clock, so these old non-conforming vacant storefront spaces can be reoccupied. So to clarify, these storefronts could be filled by retail trade, service, or office uses, and wouldn't allow legacy non-conforming uses to return. Currently, this is already permitted in R5, R6, and R7 districts, seen here in gray. And so this proposal would expand these existing provisions to apply to all residential districts, making the rules more consistent and hopefully reducing vacancy. The green portions of the map here highlight where the new text would expand these provisions, which in Community Board 3 are almost entirely higher density R8 districts. Then in many parts of the city, we have similar but differentiated commercial districts that are located along the same corridor, like on First Avenue, or on opposite sides of the street, like on Grand Street, and yet allow different kinds of businesses. And so this section, for example, of Court Street and Cobble Hill, pictured here, shows how these differentiations force these uses to either one side of the street or the other. So for example, you might be able to open up a bike sales shop on the right side of the street, but if you wanted to also rent your bikes, you would have to be located on the left side of the street instead. So to simplify these distinctions and treat similar zoning districts similarly, Proposal 2 would allow a consistent mix of businesses in C1 and C2 commercial districts, and a consistent mix of businesses in C4, 5, and 6 districts, removing the arbitrary barriers for businesses to locate. So to clarify, here are the uses currently permitted in C1 and C2 districts today. Residential, community, retail, and office use are currently allowed in both districts, including things like bars and restaurants, vets, barbers, bike sales, and so on, and this would not change. Personal and business services, entertainment, hotel, and wholesale are currently only allowed in C2, but under this proposal, they would be allowed under both districts, as these are often already located alongside each other on neighborhood commercial corridors. So to see where this applies, here are the C1 districts in Community Board 3, highlighted in orange. For example, on the northerly side of most avenues, the southern portion of Avenue B and Clinton Street. And here are the C2 districts, where these additional and parallel uses are permitted. And you might notice that C1 and C2 districts often abut or mirror each other. And then finally, here are the C1 and C2 districts alongside one another, with the proposal's consolidation of uses, making these neighborhood commercial corridors more consistent in terms of local commercial uses permitted. The rest of the distinctions between C1 and C2 districts will remain the same. Similarly, here are the are the proposed uses permitted in C4, 5, 6, and 7 districts. We'll come back to this, it'll stay on the screen. So here are the areas C4 districts located mostly around Allen Street. The area has no C5 districts. And the area's C6 districts located mostly on the western extreme of Community Board 3. So looking at the chart, the primary differences between the C4 and C6 use groups are custom manufacturing and wholesale establishments. So finally, here are those districts with consolidated uses. And again, other distinctions between C4, 5, and 6 districts would remain. So this proposal would foster continuity, clarity, and consistency in our commercial corridors across the city. With Proposal 3, we want to allow small-scale clean production like a pottery studio, bakery, or an apparel designer, to locate in commercial districts. So currently, commercial districts permit a limited range of production, some of which is obsolete. We recognize that there will be concerns around quality of life in relation to some kinds of production, so the businesses included in this update would be subject to both current and new additional environmental requirements and standards to ensure that they're not negatively impacting their neighbors. And we think this proposal would make a big difference in helping New Yorkers who want to make things and sell things in the same space to the community, and in many cases, benefit from local retail foot traffic. So that space would be less than 5,000 square feet in C1 and C2 districts, and up to 10,000 square feet on the ground floor in C4, 5, 6, and 7 districts. Next, if one of the clean production businesses in the last proposal wanted to move into an empty office building, today they would face rules that would require them to add additional loading docks, even if they don't need them, and even if the building can't physically accommodate them. So Proposal 4 would allow for older commercial buildings to change over time by not mandating that a business tear apart the ground floor of a building to provide new loading docks. Proposal 5 wants to facilitate more adaptation. So today, zoning allows for many buildings to have a mix of residential and commercial uses, but sometimes restricts businesses from being able to use upper floors. For instance, in some commercial areas, a second story could include a medical office, but if that office were to go away, there's no way for zoning to allow another kind of office to fill that vacant space. So this proposal would enable renovations or new construction of mixed-use buildings by allowing commercial uses at the same level or above residences, provided that complete separation between these uses is maintained, as in the second and third parts of the diagram seen here. And you can sort of see how these renovated or new buildings would maintain the isolation of these uses with separate entrances and buffers. Finally, our zoning is full of antiquated terms like typewriter repair, and that makes it harder for newer business types like cell phone repair shops to know where they can locate. And many new and startup businesses who may be unfamiliar with the zoning resolution can have a hard time understanding which category they pertain to, and it can cost significant time and money to get answers they need to locate their business. And this proportionately disadvantages small and startup businesses and advantages bigger and more established businesses. So Proposal 6 would modernize the terms that we use and reorganize them with compatible or similar uses to simplify and update the zoning resolution. For our second goal, we want to support growing industries by reducing obstacles in zoning for emerging business types. Each of the industries highlighted in the second goal, urban agriculture, life sciences, nightlife, amusements, and home-based businesses, face ambiguity or outdated restrictions to our zoning. So I'll explain how this amendment updates each of these. Proposal 7, let's take a peek. Businesses that want to operate indoor agricultural facilities, such as vertical farming within commercial areas, face uncertainty with today's zoning rules. Proposal 7 would clarify that indoor agriculture is allowed in commercial districts, so more food can be grown closer to communities. Proposal 8 would make it clear that labs, specifically without potential for environmental hazard, are appropriate in office settings. So life science is a growing and promising industry, but over the last few years, there's been some confusion as to what kind of labs can locate in commercial areas versus locating in industrial areas, which a 2016 Department of Buildings, EDC, and City Planning memo sought to clarify. So these kinds of labs, already allowed in nearly all commercial districts, follow very strict rules for their operation under city, state, and federal law. So this proposal would just be making regulations that are current clearer. The proposal would also expand where existing laboratory special permit can be used, so that labs in the future might be able to locate closer to research centers like hospitals and universities to facilitate cutting-edge research into new therapies, vaccines, and medical devices, things like that. And since there may be worries here also, I'll just point out that there are already protections in place to ensure that laboratories only qualify for the existing special permit if they conform to the performance standards applicable to M1 clean light manufacturing districts. Next, restaurants and bars face confusing regulations on whether they can host concerts, dancing, comedy shows, or open mic nights. So Proposal 9 would simplify the rules so that they're based on the size of the venue rather than the activity, so that it's hopefully easier to regulate. You'd see only small venues in neighborhood commercial corridors and larger venues in places like Midtown. So it's important to emphasize here, I think, that today a restaurant or bar is allowed to have live music in any commercial district, whether that live music takes the form of background dinner accompaniment or a full band with amplified sound. But in some places, that same bar or restaurant might have prohibited, or prohibition issues from having the band charge a cover or advertise its showtime. So maybe hosting other live entertainment such as comedy or open mic nights, they face prohibition too. So furthermore, it is still illegal in certain areas under zoning to dance in a bar, a club, or a restaurant, even though City Council itself repealed the cabaret law several years ago. So zoning has been both inconsistent and in contrast with our legislation. Proposal 9 aims to clarify when a bar or restaurant can host dancing or other forms of entertainment, specifically with posted showtimes or cover charges, by regulating the business based on capacity and not activity. So this means that live comedy, DJs, dancing, ticketed events would now be treated the same under zoning, but the venues would have their occupancy limited to 200 people when locating in neighborhood commercial districts and commercial overlays, such as those C1 and C2 commercial districts that proliferate Community Board 3, as we saw in earlier slides. Bigger venues would be confined to central business districts like Midtown and the city's industrial areas. So this should make it easier to identify and therefore regulate said activities. And I need to say here that we know bars and restaurants greatly concern and impact the community. So it's important I stress that the agency has been working as close as we can with our colleagues at the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and other city agencies to protect quality of life for New Yorkers. Rules and regulations from the Department of Buildings and the Fire Department around occupancy and safety, as well as Department of Environmental Protection regulations for amplified sound and community board stipulations during the liquor license process are all mechanisms to help ensure that venues are being good neighbors, even when zoning can't ensure that. And programs like Mend NYC, which offers mediation and resolution through the Mayor's Office of Nightlife, are able to help address issues that arise between nightlife venues and community members. Zoning is overdue a repeal of the last remnants of the cabaret law, and this proposal just finishes the job while keeping nightlife venues small in neighborhood settings. Next, zoning restricts experiential amusement businesses like virtual reality or children's arcades to Coney Island or the city's industrial areas. And Proposal 10 would simplify and modernize how zoning treats amusements and recreational activities to make clear that these businesses are allowed indoors and at a smaller scale on a neighborhood street than in office districts. Next, the pandemic has changed how New Yorkers work from home, but zoning unfortunately prohibits specific occupations like barbers or interior designers, and has other restrictions that can hold back business creation. So Proposal 11 would enable entrepreneurship with modern rules for home-based businesses while keeping in place safeguards to ensure that home-based businesses are being good neighbors, like not having exterior signage, abiding by noise and environmental rules, not selling you anything you didn't make on site, that sort of thing. Our third goal is to foster vibrant neighborhoods by ensuring that businesses contribute to active, safe, walkable streets. inconsistency in existing streetscape regulations, or in some cases, a total absence of zoning rules, means there's no way to curb some of the worst outcomes of business activity spilling out into the public right of way. So these three proposals will focus on streetscape design, auto repair businesses, and micro distribution hubs. Firstly, streetscape conditions like long blank walls and drive-throughs break up retail streets and can create unpleasant and sometimes unsafe conditions for people walking past. But in vast parts of the city, there are no rules whatsoever to prevent new construction that makes conditions worse. And Proposal 12 would create a consistent set of design rules for commercial ground floors to be more responsive in areas with greater pedestrian activity and more relaxed in the city's more auto-oriented corridors. So just to dig a little deeper on this, the framework is generally tiered, with the broadest tier, tier A here in teal on the chart, being the most relaxed of the cumulative regulations. So under A regulations, any commercial district or MX district would require parking to be at the side or the rear with screening for in-building parking, and it would prohibit drive-throughs, and it would require blank wall mitigations. The next tier, B, which proliferates the district, applies all of those regulations with additional regulations for primary street frontages, seen here in orange. So for this tier, all parking must be wrapped with no curb cuts for parking or loading berths. And additionally, in a transit zone with commercial overlay or a district with R5 density or above, this would prohibit ground floor residential units on the frontage, place a 50-foot cap on lobby length, implement minimum transparency regulations, and ensure that parking is completely enclosed. And then finally, there are only a few areas touched by the special district regulations in CB3, and those are related to the special transit land use district. That's highlighted here in purple along 2nd Avenue with some additional geographies. And in these areas, the proposal would update these regulations to reflect changes in underlying zoning districts so that commercial districts, uses next to subway entrances would be subject to the proposed streetscape regulations that require active uses at grade. In residence districts, the permission for limited commercial uses next to transit easements, which apply elsewhere in the city, would be made to apply here as well. Proposal 13 would consolidate the range of auto servicing uses in zoning into two categories: light and heavy vehicle repair and maintenance. Light and heavy vehicle repair and maintenance. Heavy vehicle repair and maintenance must be licensed by the state DMV and would continue to be allowed in industrial areas, while light vehicle repair could be located elsewhere, though only after appealing to the Board of Standards and Appeals. Next, zoning doesn't allow for delivery activity within buildings except in industrial areas, which sometimes forces the activity to occur on sidewalks and streets. So we're proposing to create a new type of use in zoning called a micro distribution facility, and regulating those facilities to locate at small scale in commercial areas to encourage deliveries to shift to alternative modes of transportation, ideally non-vehicle modes, and regulating the creation of local hubs for safe and sustainable deliveries to occur. The hope here is for such facilities to be smaller, better distributed, and generate less of this kind of problematic traffic. Thanks for bearing with me. I know it's a lot. Our fourth and final goal is to create new opportunities for businesses to open. And these last four proposals all update the zoning toolkit with new avenues to foster business expansion and adaptation. They focus on residential campuses, corner stores, waiver processes, and loft buildings. So we'll get into each of those now. For example, many large-scale residential developments, such as NYCHA campuses, are zoned as residence districts, meaning that retail, services, maker spaces can't easily locate, and that residents of these developments are further away from local goods and services than in neighboring areas. Proposal 15 would create a CPC authorization to allow up to 15,000 square feet of commercial space in existing or new construction on a large-scale residential campus. Further, some portions of New York City are not within walking distance of a local retail store, like a bodega, and current zoning has no real pathways to potentially allow a new locally serving business to open. So Proposal 16 would create a discretionary pathway whereby a business could initiate a process to locate a corner store where it makes sense, provided that the store does not generate any environmental concerns or traffic congestion and that it meets the findings. Next, let's say a clothing store might want to expand to occupy an empty second floor, but finds that size limitations or location rules prevent them from doing so. So Proposal 17 would expand the zoning toolkit so that businesses can initiate a process to waive some of these zoning rules on a case-by-case basis. Lastly, in some instances, it's our zoning districts themselves and not the discretionary pathways available to modify them that are obsolete. And so it's particularly true of our city's manufacturing or M district zoning designations that this is the case. Currently, low density options, physical design rules, and parking make it impossible to build loft-like buildings, even in areas where they already exist. And so Proposal 18 will create a range of new job-intensive zoning district types at a range of densities and heights that expand the zoning toolkit for future rezonings. So I know that was a lot to throw at you, and we're eager to get to your questions and your comments. I'll just close by sharing a roadmap for the process to come. The agency has spent more than a year getting this proposal in front of as many audiences as we can and presenting our ideas for solutions to the problems businesses are facing today, soliciting community feedback and questions about these proposals. And we're now in the process of going before every community board in the formal public review. So this process will wrap up in a city council vote sometime next spring, TBD. Before opening this up, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the comments and concerns that I am sure that you have on this proposal. I know that you had a consultant come and speak with you when the draft text came out, and he anticipated broad feedback on this ambitious proposal, which I'm sure you know took a Herculean amount of work to bring to you. So I'll just point out that he emphasized that we at City Planning encourage comments on this proposal, and we very much do. In addition to sharing those with me today, one great way to share that feedback is through recommendations and resolutions to modify those elements that you disagree with in this proposal to shape them into a better fit. And then finally, my colleague Chris and Jose and I will, of course, do our best to answer your questions on this Be a Myth proposal. But in the interest of being transparent and clear, we'll be taking your questions on this proposal back to the proposal team to get you the best answers possible in time for your next session. And so with that, I'll just thank you for your time, and we'd welcome any questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. That was quite a thorough presentation. A little long, so I'm sure that we're gonna have a lot of questions and probably follow-up. But we're gonna open the floor to committee members now so that they can ask questions. Does anybody wanna ask questions? Trevor,
Yeah,
I wanna give you a star.
okay. Just to be fair, I took a break from zoning issues for quite some time, so I wasn't as involved as I normally would be. But just some questions. You mentioned that basically a club will be allowed in C2 and above, and for C6, over 200 capacity for C6, is that correct?
I don't know how I muted myself. Thank you. I'm just going to double check this with our expert in zoning just to make sure. Chris, do you mind chatting in here?
Hi, everyone. Francesca introduced me earlier, but I'm Chris. I'm also with the Department of City Planning and the Zoning Division, and thank you for your question. So today, we have different flavors of eating or drinking establishments that are scattered throughout different use groups. In the zoning resolution, we have 5 different flavors, and they're very hyper specific when it comes to distinctions around dancing and the types of live entertainment that is permitted. You have certain types of eating or drinking that prohibits dancing. You have other types of eating or drinking uses that that excludes certain types of entertainment. And what this does is it often leads to confusion when it comes to enforcement. For instance, are such activities permitted in such establishments in this district? And as Francesca alluded to, this provision also reflects a period when the city had the cabaret law in place, which has been repealed since a few years ago by the city. And what we're trying to do is to very much simplify the regulations and modernize the simplifications so that's easier for people to enforce zoning. One of the big changes that we're making is, instead of specifying that whether incidental dancing is allowed or not, is by removing the distinction for dancing and certain types of entertainment. We're really much focusing on capacity and specified show times and cover charge. It's not all that drastically different from what we have today. Today, eating or drinking establishments is scattered throughout, use group 6. We have 6A and 2 use group 6C flavors. The first not allowing for the latter 2 not allowing for dancing with a capacity of up to 200 persons or fewer, and the other just being eating or drinking establishments with outdoor table services. Use group 6 is allowed in most commercial districts, C1, C2, C4, C6, C8. Whereas like the larger eating or drinking establishments without a capacity limit that does not restrict dancing is permitted in C4 through C8 districts. There's 2 different versions of that. What the proposal is doing is we are simply allowing for eating or drinking in all commercial districts, with the exception of in C1 and C2, where there is cover charge or scheduled showtime for entertainment. We are limiting the capacity to 200 persons, which is equivalent to like a regular storefront. We believe that, clarifying the distinction there, clarifying the provisions there makes it easier for people to enforce, say, larger establishments and larger nightclubs.
Christopher, let me just, because maybe I'm a little older, I'm looking at it as a club, not a place to eat or drink, a place for people to go to dance.
Right.
So I'm more focused on that, as opposed to you're trying to say that these places will allow eating and drinking. I'm just talking about a strict club. And for the C6 and C6, which from the slide, it appears that you're allowing for unlimited capacity in a C6 free club.
Which is the case today. I mean, so eating and drinking establishments is a general term in the zoning resolution that also encompasses nightclubs. And in C4 through C6 districts, there are no restrictions on entertainment or dancing today.
Right. And you're saying that in the C2, you would now allow up to 200 capacity with some other requirements.
That's right.
Okay.
C1 and C2 districts, yes.
Another question, since this is a citywide effort and you're updating a lot of zoning, it looks like a pretty big wish list for DCP. But did you look at any of the housing issues? Because a lot of the C6, C4 areas are actually more residential now because the zoning is outdated. But it doesn't appear that you had updated those particular areas, which are more residential than they are commercial. They just have that designation because the designation was put back in the 60s, and you haven't really updated that. So was there any effort made to look at what's actually on the ground to reflect what we actually have, as opposed to saying this is still a C6 area? I'll give you one area, the area I live in, which is the C64. It's mostly residential. In fact, it's mostly NYCHA and affordable housing, but it's designated as a C64. Did you take that opportunity to say, okay, let's see if we can actually make this residential, because it is residential, instead of adding more things in a C64, which you really don't need because it's residential.
Chris, did you want to jump in on this, or did you want me to take point here?
I can certainly try and address this, and if I've missed anything, Francesca, please
Sure.
chime in on it. With zoning for economic opportunity, I think we're trying to look at the integrity of the zoning district itself, and we're looking at it across the board, C1 through C8 districts, just to see what makes sense. We totally understand that, you know, housing is a very big issue in your community district. And, you know, as Francesca alluded to, this is one of 3 City of Yes proposals. The housing opportunity is certainly, you know, it's coming next year. And we're going to be addressing a lot of the housing concerns that you have. I do want to point out that, yes, there are across the city mismatches between the zoning district and what is on the ground today. I totally get that. We're looking at the commercial districts themselves, and we're seeing what makes sense from a regulatory perspective. And I'm not sure which specific area you're referring to or where you live, but if that zoning district is not matching what is on the, you know, what is currently there, I mean, there are other ways of addressing that type of issue through rezonings or other types of actions that could rectify the inconsistency between what is, you know, being regulated and what is on the ground.
Yeah, we tried that, but I'll see.
I hear ya.
Didn't work.
You said no.
You said no. But in any case,
No, I think that's
everything.
an interesting point
Yeah.
to raise here, because I think, you know, the issue here is that it looks like what you want to do is expand what's not there. And what we're saying is, you know, the area has a particular use. And in some cases, we want to continue that use. And you're telling us, right, that we should highlight that, but we have done that before with other proposals. So if there really truly is an opportunity for us to identify those areas in our district and be able to highlight them, and a commitment, you know, to actively look at that and really do something, we would welcome that opportunity, because this is actually something that we've tried to do before. And so, you know, we don't want to, at this point, you know, well, I don't know what we're going to support ultimately, but at the end of the day, I think it is, you know, a worthy initiative. And if you all have not looked at that, you know, I think what we're saying is that you should have. And, you know, we hope that we can work together now to do so.
Understood completely. I'd love to just jump in here and say I absolutely hear that. I am familiar with some of those initiatives, and I completely understand that there's frustration around this. I think part of what Chris is trying to get at, the finer points here are that this is about a regulatory framework and not what's being mapped site by site. These are tools. These are the way that this is going to look for decades to come, as far as how we envision zoning and how it is applied, not where it is applied. And so while I completely understand some of the frustration here, I think that this proposal in particular is not necessarily where we're going to be looking at mapping and changing. I think it is absolutely a reasonable concern, and I hear it, and I will be taking it back to the team. I will be taking it back to the Manhattan office, and those conversations are absolutely ongoing. So thank you.
Any other questions? Susan has a question, Anisha? And anybody else want to be put on stack?
I have a lot of questions.
All right, and then, yes, I know you were waiting.
Okay, thank
I
you.
have one follow-up.
And then Trevor has a follow-up.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure we can all agree that the zoning text needs to be updated and simplified, and a tremendous amount of work you're doing. So thank you. I'm going to address two areas, and the issue is really balance First of all, on the grandfathered, your PowerPoint said that after 2 years if a grandfathered has been vacant, it cannot be reoccupied. That's really not true. It can be reoccupied by residential. And so I think that one should be taken in consideration because that's what we need in this community. And I realize it probably would not be affordable housing, likely not affordable, but those units probably, even if market rate, would probably not be as expensive as the new buildings going up. So I think that should be taken into consideration. The other thing is it would be much easier to accept commercial in residential areas such as mid-block, small street, if there was a way to differentiate between a 4 a.m. bar and say a deli that closed at 8 or 10 or a drugstore. I believe in some other cities that hours are taken into account. There is plenty, I think, of common ground, but being able to bridge the difference between a commercial that might be real amenity to the people living on that block. And as I said, a 4 a.m. bar, 4 a.m. eating, drinking, which would now have dancing, live entertainment, and everything else. So I'm going to go to nightlife because that's where I spend most of my time. It's not what I should be doing. I don't serve members of this community well because I'm spending all my time on conflicts caused between residential and commercial establishments. And again, I think we want the businesses to succeed. Again, it's finding balance. And it seems everything I'm hearing is about making it easier for businesses, which is good, but it doesn't talk about the problems that already exist with businesses. And I just find it disturbing that none of that, we've talked to you about it, you know about it. I find it disturbing that none of it has been addressed. The Office of Nightlife does not help residents. It was established to help nightlife. The former nightlife head was very clear that mediation and everything she was doing was to help businesses no longer get fined, which meant residents had less weight in their complaints. And there was a great missed opportunity to bring residents and nightlife together and to resolve problems. That did not happen. Department of Buildings, I'm going to go on record and say there is no enforcement. The city did away with a wonderful enforcement tool they had with police cabaret units, which was not about dancing. So enforcement isn't, we know that there's not enforcement. So the only tool we have right now is zoning. And I'll give you an example. We had a live music venue wanted to move onto East 2nd Street. Very tiny street, all residential, happened to be a lot of families there. And this would mean that you'd have bands coming in and leaving at 4 a.m. with taking out all the equipment and everything. Those are wonderful places. We don't have bad businesses. We have bad locations. And we're just trying to prevent that. We've seen it. We live with it every day. You can look at the 311 stats. We are second highest out of 59 boards in the city with those kind of complaints. And they get worse, they don't get better. So I would really like to see a way to address it. I believe it can be addressed. I don't believe it is being addressed in a balanced way. And I think we would all win if there was a way besides public comment for you to actually have at the table people being impacted to sit down and talk to you about the issues and where more balance is needed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I just want to state for the record too that many of the points that Susan has raised are reflective of comments from committee members. So those are collective positions. So in case that supports with, adds any weight to that.
Can I say
Yes.
one more thing?
Yes.
There is currently dancing in every bar in the East Village. The rules are not the issue and enforcement's not the issue. People actually don't complain about that, but it's, it's already exists. And the only thing I want to say is, don't say it's going to be enforced.
Heard.
All
I
right.
very much hear. I want to just first of all say, I love the passion at this board. I hear this concern. It's a real concern. It's an age-old concern, and it is completely valid. We hear it, and we're absolutely taking it back. We're taking it back from this meeting. We're taking it back in the comments that you're going to be sharing with us. We know that this is really important and that this has been a long-standing issue. And I understand your frustration with things like enforcement and zoning. So just want to lay that out as a baseline. I also hear that 311, you have been, I'm sure, just mopping the floor with it. I'm sure that there have been many, many complaints. Those are helpful, believe it or not, in many cases, because we do take those into consideration. And I think there were a couple of points here. So what I'm going to do is break this down a little bit and offer as I go to have my colleagues jump in if they would like to. But I'll just start by saying you first pegged grandfathering and its conflict with other uses. So the first thing that I want to point out is that in the case of this particular change, right, which again is already permitted in certain areas, we've seen that in the areas where it is not permitted, it might be able to help address some of the vacancy issues. These spaces have been vacant and they remained vacant and were not filled with residential. And so in some of these cases, these storefront style spaces are not suitable to residential use. And additionally, we're planning to circle back on some of these issues because I know housing is incredibly important. We're in a housing crisis. I don't think anybody disputes that. So our third proposal is going to be a great place to address a lot of these concerns. Housing opportunity, which will be forthcoming. We're really going to start, basically, we're trying to modernize and adapt neighborhoods overall. So in this case, yes, we're allowing businesses to come back into some of these commercial spaces. We're hoping to also allow for other kinds of adaptation that favor residential use down the line. So we will be discussing that as well. Before we move past this, Jose or Chris, did you have anything to add? Okay, great. So then I will I think the next thing that you referenced was zoning around hours of operation. I am going to lean heavily on my zoning colleague for this one, but I'll just say that from my understanding, it's not necessarily the best policy in New York to zone around hours, and that can be regulated through other channels like the liquor licensing process. For example, there are other mechanisms, not necessarily of enforcement, but for laying out those kinds of guidelines where, zoning has really strict oversight and enforcement mechanisms and really conforms to a set framework. And in New York City, hours of operation has not been a part of that framework. Chris, do you want to jump in a little bit on this?
No, you summarized it perfectly.
Okay. And
Just respond to that. So we work very closely with the SLA, probably even more closely than we do with most city agencies. The city and the state don't coordinate and work together on any of these enforcement issues. And they're actually also at conflict and at odds. And what you're stating, we've seen from open dining, it doesn't work to say it can be dealt with by the SLA. That is not what their mission is. And it would be great if we could sit down sometime and actually talk about our real experiences with this. It might be very helpful for everyone.
Understood, very much heard. I think I personally would love that. So I will absolutely be taking that back. And I absolutely hear you that is not their mission. I think that using zoning as a tool in that way, it's not an effective tool for the job, partly because of the way that it is so blanket across the city. I'll again, if Chris, you want to jump in to speak to some of why that may not be a best fit, but I'll just say, as far as the SLA, that is a tool that we can use as leverage in discussions. I'll add here somewhere I was sort of circling around to, because you mentioned enforcement, DOB, and nightlife. One of the programs, and it is a relatively new program, and I know that, you know, it's from the Office of Nightlife, and there's some friction there, but there is the Mend NYC program, which relates to mediation. That program is only 3 years old. It is voluntary, but it does have significant repercussions. It has an 83% resolution rate for those that choose to participate in it. That's sometimes individuals, residents with businesses, mediation, or in some cases groups of individuals like yourselves to bring a business into mediation. And in some cases, we have real world examples where that process has led to, for example, residents being soundproofed at the cost of the business, or the business having to implement additional soundproofing at their cost. And for businesses that don't want to participate and don't voluntarily participate when they're brought in for mediation, there are repercussions, and those are taken into consideration by other agencies and by other mechanisms. So obviously this is not a perfect process. This particular avenue is relatively new. It's only, I think, about 3 years old. So if you have thoughts on that as well, as I'm sure, you know, all of my colleagues are saying, hey, here are these options for the community. If you have thoughts on that and feedback, we want to hear it. If you've worked with Mend and you think that that is, you know, an inappropriate answer and needs refining, bring that back. If you feel that the city and the state, as you say, are not coordinating and they're at odds, we will be taking that back. That is all really helpful feedback. I know it's not perfect, but it is there and it is helpful for us. So thank you. Chris, did you want to dive in on any part of this?
Yeah, just on the point of why can't zoning regulate, or why is it not a good idea of regulating hours of operations in zoning? We haven't done it for other types of uses, generally speaking. And so we don't see an exception for eating or drinking establishments to regulate hours of operation. And in addition to that, it's just incredibly hard to enforce through zoning. We're already seeing that through, you know, the current language in the zoning, which restricts certain types of entertainment, whether you can dance or not dance, and that is already really tough to regulate under today's rules. So hours of operations would be, we feel like there's other channels of doing that outside of the zoning framework.
Can I just say, when we talk about this, we've been involved and we know, I've been involved, I've been in these Mend things. If you go through Mend and you go through the process, it's considered successful. There is absolutely no way to enforce it, and it conflicts with the stipulations put on the community board, and it's secret. That's part of the whole thing. So I would just like to, again, we can discuss this offline. I don't think it's ever been successful once in this board, and I doubt if it's been successful very often. It doesn't fly. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. You know that you're given a description, but it does not fly in a description.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I'm gonna limit you all, because I have some folks. No,
I'm
it's
gonna
okay.
stop.
No, it's okay, Susan. But I want to hold your response, please, Francesca. I know
Just real
that
quick.
Trevor has a follow-up, Anisha's been waiting patiently.
Yeah, mine isn't a
If
follow-up, it's more about the chat, because I can't see, he's responding to some things in the chat. I don't know if there's a better way to do it.
Well, actually, we were just having that conversation,
Oh.
Carl and I, because there is a chat and people are responding, but everybody's not seeing that in real time. And so I think I'd like to limit the chat responses, please, because it makes it too difficult for everyone to follow. I'm gonna ask Carl to shut that portion down, all right? And then if there's anything that was said, because I can't even keep up with what's being said, that has not been said, Then I'm gonna ask you after Anisha is done to clarify any points that you might have that you think are relevant for us to know. Otherwise, I wanna move on to Anisha, and then before I do that, I just wanna know if there's anybody else on staff. So I have Steve, Alistair, I don't know which one of you were first, but I saw your hand first. So Steve, Alistair, anybody else? Okay. Anisha.
Question.
Oh, and then John still has, do you wanna be called on, John,
Yes.
now? Cause he's been waiting for a while, so after Anisha, we'll do John, Steve, and Alistair, okay, cause he'd already asked, and you all just don't know that. Anisha, please.
Thanks. Thank you all for the presentation. It really does look like there's been a lot of work that has gone into it, and some of the proposals, make a lot of sense. I'm not gonna comment specifically on particular things. I have two sort of like higher level questions. First, this whole proposal is titled around economic opportunity. And, I think that, makes sense with the proposals that you have. I wanted to know if there was any analysis or impact study of how this will, if there will be any sort of like regressive outcomes. Will it disproportionately affect low-income communities, low-income people? I think when we think about opportunity, it's not available for all the time. And zoning has enforced that over time in history. And so as we consider these zoning changes, particularly a citywide one around economic opportunity, are we actually enabling things that allow all people to benefit from it? So that's the first thing. And then second is sort of related to it, but there were a set of industries that were picked, right, as being allowed, life sciences, for example. How are those picked? We're using public tools to support private business. Why those over any others?
Excellent questions. I'm going to jump in here. I think the first question is a really valuable one, and one that is asked often by the department: how can we make things more equitable? And I think a lot of these proposals, for example, around home-based businesses, are designed to create a more level playing field in terms of business opportunity. I think, I used to work with a lot of small business owners, startup business owners, entrepreneurs, families that are working extra jobs and trying to make money. A lot of these folks will tell you that they are, there are barriers to creating a traditional brick and mortar business, for example, that would be really best served by creating more flexibility for these kinds of folks. So there are definitely proposals here that we did think about this and we did consider this, and we're trying to do it blanket across the city in ways that make sense, that are clear and easy to understand, so that nobody has to, for example, ante up and get a land use attorney to understand what they're allowed to do when and where. And actually that's going to really lower the barrier for a lot of the folks who are most limited and hamstrung often by our own bureaucracy. So that's the first thing I'll say. Obviously not perfect. Obviously, these are a lot of new tools, a lot of broad brushes, and that's always going to have drawbacks. We're trying to rectify some of that, and we're going to take your comments, your experiences, and your insights back to this team to make sure that we're doing the best we can on that front. To your second point, for example, around life sciences, yes, we are trying to accommodate growing industries because times are changing. I think no one will dispute that life sciences, for example, especially, is a growing field that is important and that will continue to grow and continue to be important. And so having really clear regulations so that that field can be properly understood and can grow and can hire people and can innovate is going to be really critical. Obviously, these are bigger businesses, bigger institutions, but they also have a place and need to be addressed before this confusion kind of sets us back. Krista, do you want to dive in on that any further?
Yeah, just on the question of why life sciences or why specific types of, industries or uses. And that's one part of the answer. The other part is also that a lot of these types of uses are not clearly contemplated in the zoning today, and we just want to clarify it's all regulated and codified in zoning. So for instance, laboratories, which includes life science, there's 2 different versions of it today. And the enforcement agencies, we've often have scratched their head as to what is permitted in the commercial version of laboratories as opposed to the manufacturing version of laboratories. Today it says medical or dental laboratories for research or testing, or the custom manufacture of artificial teeth and denture, which is really specific. But questions like, can I conduct experiments? Can I, what if I'm not a medical or dental laboratory? Can I still be considered a laboratory? Am I really a retail use, which is, in that bucket of uses? Can I manufacture more than just dentures or artificial? So these are the types of questions that arise because of how hyper specific the zoning is. So we just want to simplify it as much as possible. There are other types of uses that we try to address that have encountered similar issues in the zoning today.
That makes sense to me. I think what I'm interested in knowing is, from an economics perspective, it makes sense that you would use this to support industries that you want to see more of. My question is, why those? Like, what thinking went it? Is it just because you heard from a ton of people that there were like questions that were being asked about these? I think, and you don't have to answer that now, but that's the question I have. And that relates to my first question about economic opportunity. Because again, you're enabling a certain set of activities to grow, but are those really like equitably distributed and accessed? And I think to the finer point, there are things that would affect NYCHA properties over other things that might have a disproportionate, effect on residents of those communities. And so I think actually doing an analysis of like where there might be disproportionate effects is important. I would also say that like that analysis should actually be an analysis and not just comments from people who show up at public meetings, because we know that is not reflective of all things.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, Francesca, did you want to chime in?
I was just going to say thank you. That is completely, yes, I agree. And we will take your comment back.
Thank you, Nisha. I think next we have John.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm really concerned about, there's a lot of things actually, but one of the things I'm really concerned about, it seems like you guys are really incentivizing businesses to convert what is currently residential into business. And that's a huge advantage to like landlords actually, and landlords will want to do that in a heartbeat. They can sign longer term leases, they can finance their buildings at higher valuations. You're basically in a neighborhood like ours, you're going to wind up losing a lot of residential in theory, particularly when you're bringing in new uses that couldn't have been used before, particularly ones that don't support us, like having you talk about having these mini distribution centers and more businesses, but yet somehow traffic is going to disappear. No, it's actually not going to disappear. It's going to get worse, as a matter of fact. And the fact that we don't actually have loading zones in a lot of these places will mean that or loading docks, they'll actually be asking for loading zones. So we're going to lose parking to loading zones, right? We're going to have people come more and more, ask for parking to be removed and actually have loading zones in a lot of these places because they're now commercial, not residential. So the question is that how does this actually help our neighborhood? They're going to be actually fewer residents to support these businesses. So it doesn't really make any sense. And the thing too about this is that you're supporting, a lot of nightlife establishments, the ones that are going to be on the second floor or on rooftops are already a huge problem. And you guys talk about the SLA, but we're actually only lucky we have the SLA now. If the SLA changes to someone who just decides to rubber stamp whatever and not listen to the community board, we've lost all the power we have. And actually under this zoning issue, we've actually lost more power to what way you rezone. We literally have no input into our community. We've lost it all, in a sense. So we have no way to control these problems. And particularly with nightlife, sure, it's even if the SLA does do some things, the more establishments you bring in, you actually bring in more foot traffic with drunk people on the streets until 4 a.m. More and more of them. And this is you need like an army of police officers to solve this problem. And, so the issue is you're actually, the funny thing is you keep saying modernizing, but it's not actually modernizing. You're just making a few use changes and you're actually going backwards. to where it's at some point, you're gonna keep making it easier for businesses. It's gonna turn into a Wild West, and the only way to stop that is enforcement, which we don't have, and enforcement's probably gonna get worse with budget cuts. So I don't know, I just feel like community's lost all input. You're incentivizing the wrong thing. There's no way the third plank of housing is gonna be able to solve these issues, because landlords are gonna want businesses, they're not gonna want tenants. You know, it's just like, it's common sense economics, you know, and then you're gonna wind up in a vicious cycle where you have more and more empty storefronts, you know, fewer residents, and what do we have left? We're gonna be left with a husk, you know? I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. So I just don't, I mean, it seems like there's no balance here. You know, if you actually did business and housing at the same time, that would make sense, because you actually need residents and businesses to survive. You know, and if you want to modernize like London, that's great. But like, you know, London's just a bunch of big, tall buildings now. And it's, you know, if you make everything uniform, you know, you're going to lose you're actually going to lose the neighborhoods we actually cherish here in New York City. So I just, you know, like, you know, Jackson Heights is not the Lower East Side. Okay. So, you know, I just see like you guys are going about this the wrong way. In a sense, there are some common changes, sure, but you know, they're actually causing, it can be causing as many problems as you solve. No, but there's a lot of questions in there, like why do they keep incentivizing more businesses? You know, and more wholesale businesses, not retail businesses. You know, and the thing is that we already have like severe problems with our nightlife establishments that are actually expanded onto the second floor and rooftops, and that's only going to get worse. It's going to exacerbate these problems with no enforcement. So, you know, to me, I think Susan mentioned balance, but I see no balance whatsoever in any of these proposals. There's zero balance.
So do you all want to respond to John's points and questions?
Thank you, John. First of all, that was, I think I can feel the passion, and it's a lot of valid concerns and a lot of questions, a lot of comments. Again, to start, we'll be taking all of this back. But I think it is, you know, you mentioned if we were doing housing and business at the same time, I think we're trying to do it as much at the same time as possible without completely overwhelming community boards, which is why we've staggered it this way. And we will be coming back at this with housing, and I challenge you to wait and see how you feel about it. But you've also said Jackson Heights is not the Lower East Side. That is absolutely understandable. This proposal is addressing zoning and not where the zoning is mapped, and not the specific uses, not the character. This is a citywide update. And so you're absolutely right. There is other differentiation to take into account. I hear you on, you know, the concerns around the expansion of these uses, the expansion of supporting business uses, the economy around commercial space. And I think it's also worth noting that commercial space has undergone a lot of changes in demand of late. I think that this is part of a larger reorganization around how we're using these spaces. I'm gonna kick this over to my colleague, Jose, who I think he was the one working in the chat a little bit, and I think he was trying to be as explicit and detailed on the record as he could be. But Jose, are you able to join in?
Yeah. Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Jose.
Great. Jose Trecios here with the Manhattan office. Yeah, I mean, I just first, you know, thank you for allowing us the time to speak today. You know, I am on my 6th short row of this text amendment, and the more I read it, the more I hear from the public is, you know, the more we're bringing back to the members who are putting this together. And, you know, I think that definitely you know, Chair, I'm a New Yorker like you. You know, I'm also concerned about some of these changes, some of these proposals, and trying to understand how this will shape the future of New York. You know, a lot has been said about zoning. I mean, I personally think zoning to be a little bit more reactive than proactive in many cases. what we're doing is, update the zoning to actually reflect what's currently existing in these commercial districts. To one of the points that was said before in terms of this, bringing more commercial or having, landlords have longer vacancies to rent out to specific businesses, that potentially could be the case. It's definitely the case right now. And, existing open vacancies where you have prime real estate and you would like to pick and choose what type of use you want to have in your building. And that's up to the business owner. We are not mapping new commercial districts. Commercial districts are already allowed. The commercial overlays are already mapped. So we are not taking away from residential existing square footage to put it into commercial. What we're doing is, if you could say, is boost the commercial, potential in all of these areas.
There's going to be no residential units lost to business. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, there will not be.
Really?
Unless we're talking about, and I see George, because we had this conversation before, and that is, again, if you have a C1 and C2 district, which now is allowing you to have commercial on tap, that is part of, you are reducing, yes, FAR or floor area that could be totally accommodated to residential, to a mixed use type of building. But we're talking about to a maximum of 2 FAR, right? Because that's what the commercial FAR or the overlay will give you. 2 FAR translate a maximum of, depending on the 1 to 2 stories. Yes, that could be 6 to 10 units of more housing. Comparing that to a natural business, I don't have the crystal ball to say which one is more than the other. The agency and the department, and we're also working another text amendment for housing opportunity, for the adaptive reuse, so having the office space being adapted to residential. Everything is coming in tandem. What, like the boost that we're trying to provide in this particular commercial district also goes in hand with what we're doing with the other studies. The need of having or expanding the commercial overlays, specifically talking about C and C2, with more businesses, come to the need that people are more and more working from home than before. That the C2 districts that were previously mapping a little bit, with a more extensive type of use group, are no longer, or like people who are living in primary residential neighborhoods, we C1 districts, children had to travel a little farther to use those type of businesses. By allowing and expanding these use groups, you are bringing that to the actual neighborhoods that are needed. So that is the rationale that the agency is going with in this analysis. But yes, if we want to get very particular into like reducing the floor area, we can say yes, to an extent that is a maximum of 2 FAR. And, that will depend in the market. Me and George had a discussion about 125th and East Harlem and some other special districts that already allow this, but you're not seeing, some of this type of mixed use and, second floor, third floor. We're seeing it, especially when we're talking about huge type of buildings or new developments or 20 stories where you need an anchor type of, development to actually have, I will say the capital one to have a business that wants to have, locate in these type of districts. So it's going to be very driven by the market. Yes, we're expanding it to C1 and C2 districts because that's the type of vitality that we want to see in local serving neighborhoods. But it's also, coming with the type of enforcement. We had talked about enforcement today. We had talked about noise violations. So FDNY, DEP, DOB, and other city agencies, the nightlife mayor's office are all involved and are all, very cognizant of the issues in here. I always try to, point out to people to the open restaurant text amendments that we did last year on this, when, we proposed the text amendment to allow them to be as a right. And a lot of the community members come out and said that, we should actually have a plan before we bring this to a vote. And that happened, right? It was you, it was the public, it was the community boards who asked for this. And we delivered that to our, to the CPC and City Planning Commission, and to the representatives of the Department of Transportation, that we needed to have a plan before we actually could do this text. So, we are here, especially to hear all the criticism, all the critical feedback, hopefully, And especially, I invite you guys, if you see the proposal, we have 18 proposals with 1,110 pages I had to go through twice. And I still, it's still very confusing. And I recall some items of this text amendment that I seen somewhere, and I tried to, Command F and find it. But, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to, wrap your mind around it. So we definitely are here to try to answer all these questions, but also happy to follow up with any information. And I don't know if I covered all the questions that were asked.
You guys have no enforcement of situations. So for example, let's say that I want to open a barber shop, right? What's going to stop me from moving into an apartment and converting it to a barber shop? Who's going to come and actually check a year down the line that it's not a full-time barber shop? Seriously, who's going to enforce that?
That is currently enforced by DOB.
Really?
Okay.
Is this a comedy show? Because it's kind of funny, actually.
But
So
it's
it's going to get worse is the problem, though, right? You're going to exacerbate the problem. And they already don't have sufficient enforcement, right? Correct?
It's also important to note that we're not taking away, a landlord or a condo board, co-op board's ability to evict a bad actor. So when you have a home occupation and that home occupation business is causing a lot of, disturbance around on that floor or whatever it is, the landlord and the owner has the right to evict that tenant.
And additionally, I think it's really worth pointing out that this is ultimately going to be a gateway to a lot of, when we use the word economic opportunity, that's no joke. Like, this is really going to open up a lot of opportunity to families and stay-at-home parents and folks who, really don't have the ability to pursue other means. This is a home-based business, for example, can create additional benefits that, hopefully we can address the bad actors, as Chris said, through, various different means, but the zoning won't be standing in the way of these people.
I have some, people are busting at the seams to ask questions. I mean, clearly, we have a lot of mixed views. We don't necessarily, we understand what you're trying to accomplish. We understand that you want to simplify things, but I think, we've been doing this for a really long time. And so we know that there are unintended impacts and sometimes intended impacts. And so in the absence of real data and analysis that shows us how all of these proposals are truly going to equitably benefit economically our communities, a lot is up for debate here. But, we're certainly gonna be sending you all a lot of comments, and I hope that you're really taking all of this feedback, in the spirit in which it's being given to you tonight, and taking it back to the team. And Anisha has a follow-up question.
I just
Just
have
a quick point, right? And you had a
No,
follow-up.
they.
And then Steve is next and Alistair, and we're just gonna be very quick and brief in your response, please, because I wanna make sure that the others really get a chance.
I just have a very quick comment, and it doesn't need a response. It's one of the comments that you said is that the market will drive all sorts of things. I just want to remind us that zoning is an intervention in that. So it actually matters, right? It's not, that will influence the market to go one way or the other. So it's not just, we'll let whatever happens. That's why we care so much.
That's right. Thank you, Anisha. Steve, please.
Yeah, I just want to support John's comments and his concerns about how some of these changes could really result in a significant loss of residential units and affordable housing. I work with Cooper Square Committee, so we have organizers who work with many tenants in the neighborhood who've experienced harassment from landlords trying to push them out over the years in order to bring in higher rent paying tenants. And commercial tenants can pay a higher rent per square foot than residential tenants, especially rent stabilized tenants. So my concern is that businesses, the landlords will try to push people out so a business can then expand into the second floor. They just need to build an interior staircase, I would assume under the zoning, right? To go up to the second floor. They don't need a separate entrance at the second floor level. So I can see this being very widespread, situation throughout the neighborhood. So I have real concerns about that. Secondly, in terms of grandfathering, we work also with the East Village Merchants Association. There's about 600 grandfathered storefronts in this neighborhood. I think right now about 5% of them have been vacant for at least 2 years. We've documented about 32 of them. Some of them, though, I think one of them is a couple of units that are in a city-owned building right now, which is supposed to eventually become affordable housing. So I am concerned, they've been sitting vacant for years. I'm concerned about the possibility in that case that if they can't be reoccupied by commercial space, the residents there would be relying on that to help subsidize affordable housing would be negatively impacted. So I do think that there should be some sort of waivers. I mean, I don't want to completely eliminate the 2-year or some sort of time period. I don't think making it permanently commercial is a great idea, but I also have real concerns about some of these spaces. I think a lot of these, the merchants in the Independent Merchants Association, they're mainly in the grandfathered spaces because they're the most affordable storefronts in our community. When you go on the avenues, you have a lot, they're paying much higher rents, you have a lot more chain stores and franchises. So I do see a real benefit to having a lot of these stores on side streets. And if they go more than 2 years being vacant, I hate to think that they can't be reoccupied. So I have some sympathy to the idea of extending that, but I don't know about making it permanently commercial. Is there any data regarding C1 and C2? You shared data about the percentage of like service and retail in this community. Can you break that down further by C1 and C2? Because I don't know what impact it's going to have to just basically consolidate that all into C2. That's my other question.
I'm sorry, the audio's been cutting a little bit in and out. Could you restate the question a little bit?
Do you have any data broken down in this community about the different types of commercial uses in C1 versus C2? Because I don't really know what kind of impact it's going to have. Because when I walk through the neighborhood, I can't really tell that much of a difference from storefronts down on 2nd Street going further north, in terms of the type of businesses.
Got it. Got it. Well, first of all, before we gloss past your comments, I just want to say, I think what you've shared is really, really valuable. And I hope, obviously, again, I'll be taking it back. But affordable housing is top priority, and nobody wants to see anybody be driven out by commercial demand. So please do share additionally that in the comments if it's not already there. And I'll be taking that back. That's really important to us too. And hopefully we can start to address some of that also in the housing opportunity that is going to be upcoming. But additionally, hopefully we can tweak some of this language if it is going to create those kinds of perverse incentives. And additionally, I think you raise a really interesting question. I don't have that data to hand. Again, I think I said in the presentation that we work a little bit with Live XYZ, which provides some of this data. I should be able to take this back to the team and see what kind of answers I can get you as far as distribution between C1 and C2 commercial districts. It'll take a little time, but thank you for the question, and we'll see what we can come up with.
Thank you. Alistair?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and for your time and effort on this. It's more of a comment than a question. Just going back to grandfathering, I think the grandfathering, having it as an indefinite period is important. One, it reverts back to the character of the neighborhood. Those stores were there originally. I think it's nice to have those stores still there presently. I also further agree with you, the feasibility of converting those stores to residential in many instances is practically impossible because you might not have light and air to convert to residential. And if a landlord is stuck and they are not able to rent the store as commercial, it's going to sit vacant. In addition, even if they can convert it to residential, it costs a lot of money. Landlords are having a very hard time now financially. So even if they could, they're probably just going to sit and leave it vacant rather than spend $250,000 or so to convert it to residential with funds that they don't have. So I'm in support of your proposal. Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on, we still have a couple of quick points. We're gonna move on to George. At this point, this seems more like we're giving you comments. And I know that you're doing the best to answer what you can, but it's very much like comments. So if you know that you cannot answer or you need to bring it back to your team, I would appreciate if for the essence of time, if you all would get to that point so that the next person could ask questions, so we can try to be out of here within a reasonable time, but not feel rushed because this is an important topic. So Trevor next and then George.
I'm gonna be very quick. I know George is sitting here and I want to hear from him, but this is just for clarification on the indoor agriculture. Is that allowed, is it changing or is it allowing in a residential building?
Francesca, do you want me to answer this question?
Please.
Okay, so agricultural use is permitted in all districts. I think there's been confusion as to whether indoor agriculture can be permitted in commercial districts. And from our conversations with the department buildings, they've been interpreting the zoning that way. So we just want to take the chance to update the zoning. And so today, in residence districts, you can do agriculture, but it has to be outside, and there's environmental restrictions on the types of activities that can be conducted. In commercial districts, you can do outdoor, but you can also do indoor as well. So that would be the distinction between residential and commercial.
On a residential building, a person can grow cannabis in this new proposal, which is, you're saying is allowed.
The zoning doesn't distinguish between what types of, plants you grow. So anything to do with cannabis would have to go through the state licensing process. And so the zoning doesn't discriminate between the types of crops you can grow in agriculture.
We understand. Thank you, Christopher. Okay, so if there are no other questions here, then I want to give George an opportunity to maybe ask a couple of questions on our behalf or make any relevant points.
Yeah, thank you. And you can cut me off when I go too long, because I will.
Okay.
All right, I want to talk again, grandfathering.
George, why don't we say it is 8:05?
Yep.
And let's try to keep it under 10 minutes if we can.
That's fine. Okay, so in terms of grandfathering, I think there's really important zoning history to talk here that specifically involves this community board. So in the original 1961 zoning, all districts had the 2-year discontinuance clause, as they called it. And in the mid-70s, there was an exemption put in for R5, R6, and R7 districts. And that exemption was, was put in place because people were rehabbing abandoned buildings, and they were being forced to convert the ground floor retail space into residences, and it was an abandoned building, and they just wanted to get it up and going. And so the city essentially saw there was high correlation between these districts and these abandoned buildings. And so that's why they wrote this exception in for R7 districts on the Lower East Side. And at the time, the Lower East Side was an R7 district for the most part. That changed in 2008 or 2009 when you went through your rezoning. And one of the things that happened during that was the initial proposal carried forward the discontinuance clause so that your districts would have permanent grandfathering. But that changed during the process when your community board says, no, we don't want permanent grandfathering. We want to actually have the 2-year come back. And so this, my point is saying there was a relatively recent zoning action where the grandfathering for 2 years was actively put into effect in this community district. Again, that was in 2008 or 2009, I think is when it went into effect. And whether you're for it or not, I think it's important to understand that this community board actually asked for it at that time. The other thing to say, I think, in this is the competition between commercial and residential space. And you know, right now there already is competition between commercial and residential space in like the C6 districts in the south west of the district. You can convert a residential building into a commercial building if you wanted to, and we don't see a lot of that. But what we do see here is the ability for the in the commercial overlays to be able to go into the second floor. And right now you can't, right? So right now, you're essentially limited to one FAR commercial use on the ground floor because you can't go into the second floor in the commercial overlays. And so this is allowing for that to happen, which, you know, I don't know if there's going to be conversions of residential space into commercial space. I really don't know. But you know, if there were, it would probably happen here and not at 125th Street as Jose and I were talking about earlier. If it's going to happen, it's, you know, this is the kind of place where you have very active nightlife, where you're bringing in lots of people from all over to come to this area. Those second floor spaces may find higher use there. And when you combine the second floor uses that are essentially for residential use, you combine that with grandfathered uses, you combine that with, you know, the ability to do corner stores, which I'm sure are, you know, very small, or stores on campuses. That's all floor area that would come out of residential uses. So I guess, you know, my question is, it's really not a question, is, you know, is there concern about the competition between commercial and residential space? And I think we've heard from DCP that they don't think that there's a concern, but I'm not as sure about that. I think that's something for you all to think about. I also think, you know, one of the things that we were just talking about earlier is the difference between C1 and C2 uses. And that's really not the issue here. But the issue here is the introduction of M uses into C zones, right? M meaning manufacturing uses. Francesca was talking about how, you know, there were bakeries and brew pubs, you know, production places that sell things. She used the expression sell things, but that's not a requirement, right? That's not a requirement that they actually service the neighborhood. And current zoning, a lot of relatively small manufacturing uses that serve the community are currently allowed in commercial districts. But the change will essentially allow things like, you know, metal fabrication, tool and die, machinery, pharmaceuticals. It's like most manufacturing uses could go into commercial zones. And I guess, you know, the question for this board to think about is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? Is that something that you would want to have? And, you know, I'm not sure that they would, right? You know, would they actually look at here? I don't know. But the thing about neighborhood commercial streets is they're designed to serve the neighborhood, right? They're designed so that you can walk and service your daily needs near to your home. And so if you're ending up with, you know, these types of production uses, manufacturing uses that aren't serving your neighborhood, well, is that a good idea? And is that something that you want? Or would you want to like say, well, it has to be open to the public. It has to be selling to the neighborhood, as was suggested. It's something that, you know, I think the nuance there could be really important, because you could end up with a bunch of establishments that are full and they're operating, but they're not open to the public, and they're serving absolutely nobody's needs in the neighborhood. I mean, is that something that you all thought about?
Absolutely. And George, thank you so much for this. I can see that these are considered. I heard some of these when you last visited the community board. So I appreciate that, you know, maybe the answers to these questions haven't come out of some of these community board meetings yet. But absolutely, there are a couple points in there. We are absolutely concerned about commercial space versus residential space, which is why they are two of the three housing and commercial, like sort of city of yes visions that we're trying to share with the community and get community input on. If you're interested in talking about commercial versus housing and residential, please put that in your comments. But additionally, please be advised that there will be more forthcoming that specifically relates to promoting housing and promoting adaptation to more housing and proliferating housing. So we absolutely are concerned and are putting a lot of man hours into figuring out how to make sure that these balances are struck. And additionally, I think, and all of these questions and comments were really well raised. So thank you for that. I really appreciate the way that you've broken this down. When you talk about manufacturing in commercial, I think it's really important to acknowledge that, first of all, custom manufacturing, which I think is currently used Group 11, is related to what we're trying to facilitate here is things that do serve the neighborhood. They're clean technologies, they're clean manufacturing. They're things that, for example, would be located in an MX district. These businesses might choose to be in a space, a small space, a local space, because they have access to that community. I am a person who fell in love with city planning because I love neighborhoods, because, you know, I fell in love with Jane Jacobs, like streets and their activity and the vibrancy and the people that are on them and the needs that are filled. Those things are important, and they're important to planners here. And so what we're trying to do is create more flexibility for the kinds of manufacturing that are serving the community. And we think that based on the kinds of spaces this is going to free up, the kinds of manufacturing that are going to be locating are mostly going to be the kinds of manufacturing that are going to want to serve the community in these local spaces. And for the ones that you're concerned about, God forbid, metalworking, there are performance standards that they're required to address, and they should be bringing their own kind of vibrancy to their own kind of neighborhoods.
They aren't required to be open to the public, and they aren't required to sell things. And that's the point. I mean, it is if you have, you know, we talk about dark stores with distribution centers. We can be having a lot more dark stores with these types of uses that aren't open to the public, that aren't providing local services in neighborhood commercial. There are places for these, right? There are places for these all over the city that produce stuff for export outside the city or even use inside the city, but not necessarily in the neighborhood. And I think I hear what you're saying, you know, performance standards and all that, but that's not necessarily what creates the vibrancy for the street.
Sure.
I mean, and if I may, I just, you know, the collapsing of the uses and essentially allowing everything in a commercial district, almost everything in a commercial district. It seems to me to be this effort to try to, you know, there's a vacancy crisis, right? There's too much vacancy. And so therefore we need to make it easier. If you find a tenant, they can rent your space. It really doesn't matter what they do, as long as it's not a slaughterhouse or asphalt manufacturing or something like that, something really heavy. But if you're making stuff, if you're selling stuff, if you're trading stuff, it doesn't matter. You know, there's another way of reducing the vacancy, and that would be to lower the rents. And if the rents were lower, you know what, vacancies would go down, and generally I think people would be happier. And you know, I'm not a financial guy, but it just seems to be that you know, if rents went down, vacancies would go down too. And instead of using zoning to try to find more customers for landlords that could have negative effects on the neighborhood, I mean, is that a good thing? Is that a good use of the zoning tool to essentially find more customers for the landlords? Because this is not necessarily making more vibrant streets, right? Bringing in the manufacturing uses into the commercial districts. And you know, well, okay, I'll let you respond to that.
George, these are very good points, especially about rent. You know, again, what we're doing is introducing a new custom manufacturing a new avenue to allow for custom manufacturing in commercial districts. We're not allowing for all manufacturing uses. These uses in
Most.
commercial districts would be
Most.
limited to, either 5,000 and 10,000 square feet, which is quite, small compared to these bigger manufacturing uses like, animal slaughtering and processing, distilleries, all that kind of stuff. And today, some of these uses are already permitted in local commercial districts, like dressmaking shops, right? There's
Dressmaking, cobblers, tailoring, right? These are things that are designed to serve the neighborhood, right? Watchmaking and jewelry, right? And that's good.
Yeah.
You want things that serve the neighborhood.
And we believe that this current zoning today only specifies those specific types of custom manufacturing, but the economy is evolving. There's going to be more, types of custom manufacturing that we want to permit, and we want the zoning to be adaptable to, future businesses. So by limiting it to just dressmaking, for instance, there's other types of custom manufacturing that would be good for the neighbor.
I don't disagree, but you're not necessarily limiting it to that. I will go on just for the interest of time.
And then in terms of dark stores, we're addressing that by streetscape regulations, right? So we're requiring along major commercial corridors transparency requirements that,
Okay, so when I say dark stores, I mean dark in terms of activity. You can't go in. Not necessarily dark in that it's not light. Meaning a store that's effectively empty because it's not open to the public. I think that's really what the concern is, much less so the transparency requirement. I think yes.
Can you hear, George? We've run over a little bit of time, so.
Okay.
Start to wrap it up.
Okay, okay, my last point is going to be location of the commercial uses within buildings, all right? And so the big change here is going to affect the C4 through C6 districts, which allow for commercial over residences, commercial on the same floor as residences. So you could have your rooftop bar, you could have in the same building with residences. And I understand that there are environmental limitations on this. But the one thing that just seems to me to be so obvious that's a great concern is that, if you're a commercial use and you require a certificate of assembly from the Department of Buildings, you have to make certain you're not too loud. But what happens if you don't require a certificate of assembly from the Department of Buildings? You can be as loud as you want. That just seems to be like a terrible loophole.
They would continue to be, sorry, can I respond to that? They would continue to be subject to those noise codes, which is outside of zoning.
You have noise codes written into this for the larger establishments.
So I will just, if I may just jump in here, because I know that we're short on time. First of all, I thank you, and we want you to raise every potential loophole that you can possibly find so that we can make this the best possible amendment it can be, and so that we can serve New Yorkers. However, I will also say that we anticipate that for the most part, this is going to impact, because of the cost, because of other stringent requirements that we're even adding to this. Because of all of these factors, this is mostly going to impact new construction and in some cases, some renovations. And so the fact is, nobody wants to take these spaces if they're improperly designed with buffer zones, with separate entrances, with noise concerns. These are going to be built in to accommodate the restrictions that are currently extant and that we have additionally put in to address some of these concerns. But again, if you don't feel that that's stringent enough, if you're going to take it apart, we would love it. So please bring that back to us.
I have to respond to that because they said that at CB1, the same thing. And here's the thing is that I do zoning consulting, right, for people. And I can tell you there is incredible demand for rooftop space, right, in existing buildings right now, for bars and restaurants on the roof. People want to have that space. They want to have it partially enclosed. They want to have it partially outdoors. They want to do it right now. And it's really hard to do right now. You have to be in an M zone, you have to be in like a commercial district, commercial building, hotels, yes, you could do that, but largely in a mixed building, you are out of luck unless it's a very narrow pattern. And I can tell you right now, there's a lot of demand for it. And you have two different entrances. You have your service entrance over there. You have your main entrance over here. And then you suddenly have the ability to, have your separate entrances and have your rooftop space in your mixed building. And I just see that as a potential of a real quality of life issue. Because right now that use is segregated below you, right? And so the higher up you go, you don't have that noise. But this is going to be, people are going to be sandwiched between. And I'm sorry, I will shut up now.
All right, thank you, George. Thank you so much.
Can I make one last comment?
Yes.
I think one of the problems that is sort of inherent, particularly when you're dealing with our neighborhood, is that like the only way to solve your problems, both housing and commercial, is to build new spaces and huge spaces in all likelihood. You're going to basically turn us into London, in a sense, and just have huge, get rid of the old stuff that's kind of cute and build huge, massive, faceless buildings. And I don't see how neighborhoods aren't going to change. I mean, you're going to massively destroy neighborhoods. I mean, I just don't see. Anyway, that's a big problem. And I think, it's really clear that the only way to solve your problems is new construction, for both housing and business in reality. But it's not clear we're going to like what the result is. And we're not going to have any neighborhoods left, I don't think. So.
John, thank you for that. And again, I hear the concern. I think that there is a lot of vacant space in the city. And what we're trying to do is help to address some of that by rebalancing things. So I think that there are vacant commercial spaces. There's certainly vacant office spaces. And so, we absolutely understand that there's landmarks and neighborhood character and, historic districts. And so I think to the extent that you can sort of maybe distill that into a couple of questions or suggestions around some of those issues, we'd love to hear them.
Thank you. So we're gonna move to the public session. They've been waiting very patiently. We have two speakers that have signed up, three. Our first speaker is Greg Miller. Are you still here?
Yes.
Hi, Greg.
Hi.
So Greg is, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. I don't know where the camera.
I will, you can just stand right there and talk to us.
Okay.
You can talk to us.
Great.
You don't have to like.
Yeah. Same. Thank you. Again, it's Greg Miller, identify as he, him. I'm a dancer, dance advocate, and I manage a nonprofit. I just wanted to give the perspective, from the dance community. I dance at the Joffrey Ballet every Sunday. I dance at the New York City for dance, which is run by the Joyce Theater on 10th and A, and also at St. Mark's Church. I've been a dance advocate since 2005, and we did a lot of the dance advocacy that led to the repeal of the cabaret law as early as 2005. So I'm very aware of a lot of the zoning issues, a lot of the community board issues, and I've done my best to, as a manager of the nonprofit, to kind of be in between. We run the dance parade that goes right through the East Village, and we have sound monitors and things like that. And we understand the noise concerns, but as a dancer, I just have to say, I think see this as a more of a First Amendment issue than a nightlife issue, and it affects so many people across the city. This prohibition on dancing, it started in 1926. It came through conservative times with, the prohibition, and it's affected a lot of marginalized communities. In 1988, Professor Paul Chevigny from NYU repealed the zoning requirements for live music. That's why in every eating and drinking establishment throughout the city, you can have live music. So what we're really just trying to request here or ask for your support in is to have dancing at live music venues that are already constructed with the very stringent noise constraints, health and safety constraints. 2008, I believe, was the city's noise law that is award-winning across the country. That I know it's not perfect if you're next door to a bar or a nightclub, but it's there. There are numerous fire safety issues that came out of the issues from back in the 80s when a nightclub burned down in the Bronx. And so these ordinances already exist, and we as dancers feel the need to, exert our First Amendment rights. And that's where it comes from. And, our borough president is on record for supporting regulating dancing, basically by capacity and not by, these racist era laws. So my voice is shaking because I've been working on this for so long, and we're almost at the stage where we can finally remove systemic racism from our zoning laws. So I thank you for listening, for your community support. Your district manager is amazing, really fielding all these calls, and we just want to make the city better together. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for your comments, and I hope that even though those comments are being heard by city planning, that your organization is also actively working on submitting comments officially to the record. Does DCP have any response at all?
That was exactly what I was going to say. Thank you for saying it for me so well.
Thank you. All right, and so the next person up is online in our Zoom room. It is Judith. It's Judith
Zaborowski.
All right, so not too bad. Hi, Judith. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
You have 2 minutes to talk, okay?
Okay, well, I am a co-chair of the 9th Street A1 Block Association, and I listened to everything that was said. I have to say that we support everything that our district manager, Susan Stetzer, expressed. This idea of noise on the second floor. I mean, I could give you, but it takes too long, an instance where I know a landlord wants to get rid of a tenant on the second floor, and there already is an establishment underneath. And I could see him even making overtures to the establishment to get rid of her, because it looks as though this would be the way to do it. I am really upset. I mean, you keep saying, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, down the line you will respond to the housing. Down the line you will respect the community. I've lived here for 50 years. I have a prejudice against city agencies talking about down the line. Is this proposal going to go through first, and then you are going to go down the line and help us in our community? I think I've got more to say, but I think I expressed the most part. Although there was a cute little thing about bodegas in number 17. And you were saying something about bodegas are needed in areas. I have to tell you that if a bodega is needed in an area, some little businessman will come along and he will open a bodega. Landlords don't want bodegas. They want pot shops. They want bars. This is not our quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Our next speaker is Laura Sewell. Laura, are you there? You're allowed to talk now. You should be unmuted.
I think, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm Laura Sewell. I'm the director of the East Village Community Coalition. For the agencies who might not be familiar, we've long worked to support local independent businesses. We actually formed with an SBS grant, the Merchant Association that Cooper Square continues to serve so well. We also work with the community board, neighbors, and block associations on the infamous quality of life problems that we have in the East Village. So to hear the East Village described as a local serving neighborhood doesn't ring true for long-term residents. We have watched the evolution of our neighborhood into an entertainment district without any of the services. And we feel that a lot of what we're hearing will only lead to the acceleration of that process. It is really, I can see that you've all put a lot of thought into this and worked really hard. And I also agree that a lot of the existing zoning for certain circumstances makes no sense. But the fact that no residents or resident organizations or middle of the road organizations such as Cooper Square or EVCC, and there are dozens of them throughout the city, were involved or at the table during the formation of this plan is why you're hearing what you're hearing now. That's a failing I will never be able to comprehend, but it happens over and over again. So the first thing I was thinking when I was listening to all of this is there any way we can get restaurants out of use group 6? I know that I was just waiting to see what people's faces would look like when I said that, but it is really the problem. It's not the retail boutiques on 9th Street that are causing the neighbors problem. And if they were to expand to the 2nd floor, I don't think that would be the end of the world. Although I am a hardliner on no expansion because we did fight very hard for that. But having the wet uses expand to the 2nd floor is you now have a commercial entity next to residences sandwiched in between residences in tenement buildings. I mean, there's no soundproofing that. There's just no doing it.
Laura, okay?
I want to wrap up. The only other thing I want to say is the vacancy problem is a direct result of irresponsible lending. That's it. It is not, if we could solve that problem, we'd solve it. It's very hard because the rents are too high because the landlords and the people who've bought these buildings are stuck at a level. And that's something I haven't heard tonight, so I wanted to say it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura, so much for your comments. And again, I'm going to ask you to please make sure that those comments are submitted to DCP as
They
well.
shall be. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have next up, Ali Ryan. Ali, are you with us? Give us a second. We're unmuting. There you go. Thank you. You have 2.5 minutes, Ali, okay?
Okay, I hope not to take that long. I want to, so my name's Ali Ryan. I'm a resident of East Village. My family and I've lived here for a very long time. I just want to piggyback on what Laura just said and add that for me personally, if I want to buy my children's clothes, my options are to go to Macy's at Herald Square or buy something online. Like there's no children's clothes in this neighborhood. So for the types of businesses you're wanting to proliferate in this neighborhood, they don't meet families' needs. And New York City is known for the arts. It's not, that's why people have come here. That's why I personally came to this city. And that's not what you're trying to grow. And I will also add that, I mean, there are a lot of issues I have with this. But I will say, like, for allowing commercial building or commercial storefronts in NYCHA on NYCHA land is a red flag to me, because it makes me want to see what is the the housing going to show, like, because that goes in tandem, because you're basically trying to take over NYCHA land and build high rises and say it's okay because you're building a supermarket on the first floor. That's what I see. And so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Do we have any other questions from any of our Zoom participants or attendees? We don't. I know that we have Trevor who wants to make a last point. Are there any other remaining points that any committee members would like to make?
Well, actually, I don't want to make a point. It's just a clarification question. Will this address the commercial overnight parking issue? We were told in C6-4 that commercial trucks are allowed to park overnight. So we see tons of commercial trucks parking, and we think it's actually going to get worse with congested prices because now they can leave their trucks on the street. Will this address that issue? Or have you examined that issue?
That is an excellent question. Let me kick this over to Chris, who I think has more information than I do currently.
We're not touching commercial parking rules, and that sits with the Department of Transportation, but we'd be happy to.
We were told that this would require, this was years ago, probably before you got employed, that this would require a text amendment from city planning or Department of City Planning. We're revisiting this now because the problem still exists, and it is a zoning issue, it's not a parking issue. In a C6-4, commercial overnight parking is allowed by zoning. So my question is, will you look at that issue from a zoning perspective to prevent that?
We'll absolutely take that back to the team. I don't have information. I know that there's going to be a lot of consideration of comments and edits, so obviously please do still submit that. But I will ask, and I'll see if I can get you an answer.
Because it seems absurd if you think about it in Manhattan, that someone can park commercial trucks overnight and it's allowed because of zoning, not because of the city police or parking enforcement.
Well, I just wanted to add, so that's part of Department of Transportation regulations. You know, what we're touching in this proposal is the actual parking requirements for the particular uses. So, you know, there is a whole section in here that is talking about the, you know, how many parking spaces need to be provided, or, you know, off-street parking for that particular uses. But that, you know, we're talking about regulation and where people can park. That is all Department of Transportation. And we don't touch that. I mean, I'm familiar with this because I work in the open restaurants process, and a similar situation came out with a commercial loading and parking. So yeah.
I'm asking, and Francesca has addressed it, to look at that particular issue because it is a problem. It's not no standing parking. It's allowed by zoning. So we're asking you to look at the zoning for that overnight parking as a part of this citywide text amendment.
Thank you, Trevor. Yeah, I'll bring that back to the team for sure.
Okay, so if there aren't any final points, or any final questions, I would like to give Susan an opportunity to make a quick announcement related to this issue.
Thank you. And first, Francesca, I want to clarify with you. So this is about our timeline. And the latest email I got this afternoon seemed to say that we could vote in February. Is that correct?
Yes, you should have the entire month of January to review, create comments, resolutions, etc. Vote.
Okay. This has never happened before. We're trying to adjust to this. So this is great. We, the community boards, I think 30 out of 59 community boards had sent a letter to DCP requesting more time. I'm gonna be honest, we never expected to get it, but we now have 2 more months. So that will adjust our timeline. The committee, I think, will have to decide. You know, I assume we're gonna be wanting to discuss this and start crafting response in December and in January, so that it will be on the agenda both of those months. And then we will be voting on what to send in February.
That's right.
And that's correct, right, Francesca?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that was the announcement, is trying to modify and clarify the timeline. Thank you.
Right, and so that's our timeline, right? So what does this mean for the public's comments? Does it change the timeline for them as well?
Well, that's a very good question. When do public comments have to be into DCP.
Jose, do you mind taking this one just to double check?
Yeah, I was trying to actually look at the letter. I don't know if I'm muted. Hold on. Oh, no, I know. But I believe, we are expecting comments by the first week of February. So, I know the first deadline was January 8th. That has been extended to the full month of January. So that's when we expect to have the actual resolution submitted to the Department of City Planning through the portal.
So we're voting in January so our full board is at the end of the month. So you want on the first week of February, so that means we're voting in January.
All right, and I'm looking for this particular message that was sent to the community boards today, is to say there was a national day.
Was to say what?
Is there was a hard deadline on this one, but it's just the beginning of February. So I will say, we have until January 31st or whatever, or the 30th of January to submit your resolution just to be in a safe side.
So the community board will vote in the January meeting, and the committee will vote, the full board will vote in January. We'll submit ours by the first week of February. Now, for the public that are submitting comments online to you, when do those have to be in?
Are you referring to the public scoping meeting or the public hearing?
No, I'm just talking about, we heard tonight from residents and we said, be sure and send your comments to DCP. How late are you taking comments from the general public regarding the text amendment?
I will say until February, we will prefer that this come through the community board so we can add it into the resolution in a way that makes it infer. Typically, that's how things will work. But if the public wants to reach out to us, Chris chair the NYC City of Jazz page, which has a contact button, link that goes directly to the people who are working on these texts. We're taking comments and always in feedback. So if they want to reach out to us, you have Francesca's number and we can respond. But I always encourage boards or the public to go through boards in order to make sure that the resolution is, those comments make it to the resolution or the proposal that's going to be sent back to us, because that gets recorded to the zoning portal.
So if I clarify, we will hear from the public and we will take that into account. The public, particularly many community groups and many other groups and many residents and businesses are going to want to comment on their own. They will go online and send their own comments. And many other organizations. When is the deadline for that?
There is no deadline for that right now. And Chris, we're not required to hold a public hearing for the text amendment, but do you know if the CPC is doing one by any chance?
We're not doing a public hearing.
I will have to double check with you, but I believe we are having a CPC hearing for this.
Which we'll have.
We don't have a current date yet for the CPC hearing for this text.
Okay, so can the public submit comments online to you?
Yes.
And when is the end date for that?
January, in the end of January, similar to the community board.
I'm gonna just stop us real quick. Can you just please follow up with us if you hear anything very specific, if there's a hard deadline, so that we can make sure that at the very least, the residents in our community and other entities are submitting their comments in a timely fashion so that they can be considered as the team is making any changes to this plan.
I will follow up with you as soon as possible. I will not wait.
The second thing that I would like to ask for is tonight's presentation. I don't know if we have it.
We don't, but can you email it to us, and we'd like to post it on our website?
Right. And then the third thing is, if there is a portal for comments of any kind or a link where it would make it easy for folks to submit their testimony, please send that to us and identify that is what it is, so that we can make sure that we identify that in any of our materials or on our website, so that people are not lost and they know how to get you their comments.
Damaris, that's a portal that we use.
But they have a portal too.
No, that's their portal.
Right, so that's what I want.
But that's not on the public.
just send us whatever, all the links and all the things, and we'll make sure people get.
No, let me be clear about what I'm asking. What I'm asking for is whatever the mechanism is for residents or entities to submit their comments. Clarity on that and how people can do that. That's it. I don't care who it is, that's what we need.
And the deadline, correct, for the public comment?
That and the deadline. We really appreciate your time and for fielding all of these questions. We know that you've put a lot of work into this presentation. I will say it is an enormous undertaking and way too much for me, at least, to digest fully in one sitting. So I am sure that you will be seeing lots of questions trickling into you all over the next 2 months. Again, like Susan said, we will be probably submitting something formally as well. But again, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you, George. I don't know where he's at, but if he's on there somewhere. Oh, there you go, George, sorry. I was looking at the other corner of the screen. And
Before we go, do you want to ask DCP to come back in December?
do we want to ask DCP to come back in December?
I don't really see the point, but
Don't you actually?
Oh, that's.
No.
Well, I mean, I agree that I'm not sure there's a point, but I also feel that it is a very huge proposal and there's lots of moving parts. So I don't know that we're prepared to ask them that, but can we, if we were to ask you to come again in December, when should we let you know by so that you can make that happen?
The earliest possible. I will see if I can find out a deadline along with the other deadline that you asked me for. I'm not certain that we are doing that, but I will ask.
You're not certain that you can come back, is what you're saying?
Correct
Right?
for the moment, but let me just double check on that and I will get back to you.
And I think at that point, we might be able to circle back and let you know what we think based on what we hear. We have to have our own discussions too, I guess. Okay, are we done? We're done? No other questions? Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Thank you to everyone online. Thank you, Susan, for all of your work. Welcome back, Anisha. And on behalf of all of us at the community board, have a wonderful night, and we'll see you soon. This meeting is adjourned. Roll call. Right, roll call. You see, I'm just like, let's go home. So, John, can you lead us through the roll call?
yeah, Damaris here, John is here. Our admin is still not here. Alistair. Yes. Andy is still not here. Herman still here. Trevor still here. Laura is not show up. Jaylene is here, right? Sandra is not here due to an issue. Steve, you're here. Megan
Here.
and Anisha.
Here. Okay,
All right, one change.
we don't need to adjourn, we don't need to have a motion, do we?
Motion to adjourn.
No.
You just motioned.